Fulfill Radio, a voice you can trust. Broadcasting live presents Two Guys and a Bible with Don Preston and William Bell. Join us each week at 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central as we bring you exciting, sound, challenging, and comforting messages regarding the end times. Thank you for tuning in today. Don Preston is the founder of Preterist Research Institute, or PRI. Don is a prolific author, having written
William, are you there?
Yes.
Okay. I lost audio.
You here, Don?
I am here, William.
Okay. I don't know what's happening. Yes. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it appears that we had just a little bit of technical difficulty with the audio to begin, and I don't know what's happening with Don at the moment, but we're just going to bypass our intro and get right into our study today in just a few minutes.
I'm here, William. Can you hear me?
Actually, Don, what that is, hold on a second. I know what's happening.
Okay.
That's a delayed broadcast going on. I had another window open. So I was listening to myself repeat myself. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, we haven't been drinking too much strong coffee, okay? I don't even drink coffee. So that's not the issue. It has been a long day, but nevertheless, we're delighted to be here with you today. This is William Bell and Don Preston with Two Guys and a Bible on Fulfill Radio, a voice you can trust. And today our topic is going to be Johnny Oxendine, I think is the manner in which you pronounce his name. He has done a lecture on the man of sin in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. We're going to be reviewing and critiquing that just briefly. Hopefully there's enough there to critique. I assume that Don has the entire manuscript. I haven't downloaded the manuscript. Don, if you send me a link to those manuscripts where I'll know where to get them. I don't know where to get them. I
do not.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I actually do not have a link to a manuscript. I just simply listened. Unfortunately, I listened to the entire presentation. Such as it is, and took my notes. It's a little bit different than what we had for Dub McClish, whose manuscript was, in fact, available online. And unless there's a way to get a written manuscript for the rest of the speakers, I'm unaware of it. Perhaps there is, but I'm unaware of it.
Okay. Well, I don't think we certainly don't need one for this one. I heard about the first 20 minutes of it and could pretty much just realized at that point that, that was about as far as it was going. It was probably more of the same throughout the presentation, and I'll see if that's confirmed when you start talking about some of it as we go along. Any news? You were out of town just recently, weren't you, doing a workshop or seminar or something?
No, I was in Missouri over this last weekend. My wife and I went up there, took a few days off, went to an automotive swap meet actually, and just had an enjoyable time. The weather was absolutely great. I didn't buy much, unfortunately, which I like to go. I like to buy and then sell parts on the internet, but didn't have much of that. However, this weekend I will be heading if this respiratory infection that has set in on me doesn't get any worse, then I will be going to Hennessy, Oklahoma, which is in the northeast section, and I'll be having an all-day study day up there with a group of people that they registered literally at the last moment for our Preterist Pilgrim Weekend, and they showed up. There's a small group of them. And I got to talking to them. I said, do you have a Preterist fellowship up there? And the guy said, no. Said, this is entirely new to us. Said, but we've been watching your YouTubes, and we've been very intrigued. But this whole study has been fascinating. And he said, we've been dispensationalists, but we've already given that up. And so we're somewhere between amillennialism and postmillennialism and preterism. We don't really know exactly where we are. So I told him at the time, I said, I'll be more than happy if you have an interest in coming up to your place. We'll have a full study day. We can do, presentations, or we can do just nothing but Q&A, just whatever you'd like to do. And they contacted me about, 2 or 3 weeks afterwards and said, we'd like to take you up on that. When can you come up? So, like I said, if nothing happens, if I don't get worse with this stuff that I've got, and I'm sure the listeners can hear the problem with my congested head, but if it doesn't get worse, then I'll be traveling up to Hennessy, Oklahoma. I'm very excited about that. And as we noted last week, September the 11th and the 12th, I will be in Salt Lake City with Sean McCraney. Sean has a regular TV program that he has entitled The Heart of the Matter. And I'm just very, very excited about being there. I think this is going to be a great time. Sean has been promoting this event quite extensively, sending out letters to almost every preacher in Salt Lake City. So that promise, and I've been getting quite a few emails from different people who have heard the promotion of it, who are aware of it, and have told me that they either plan to attend or they cannot attend, but they're certainly going to watch it on TV. The entire seminar will be filmed. Pardon me. And then posted on YouTube by Sean. So it will be something that a person will be able to watch. So, yeah, some really cool things going on, William.
Well, good. We'll look forward to hearing some of the results of these workshops and studies that you're doing in the time to come. And I hope you have a safe trip there as well, and that you are able to overcome the congestion that you have, because, yeah, we can hear it in your voice, and just wondering how long you'll be able to hold up with that. But we'll just, hopefully just kind of lay back a little bit today and just take it easy as you go through some of the things that we're going to discuss. Well, it seems like we're beginning to get a little break in the weather, at least on our side. I don't know how it's doing out in the Oklahoma area, but it hasn't been too bad here. And I've been enjoying a little bit of the sun, so I would say that that's a plus. I got all the grandkids back in school. One's in Chicago, one's up in Tennessee, and of course the other one is here, but she lives with her mom. So the boys are gone, and we're empty nesters again for the second time.
Well, there's something to be said. Something to be said for an empty nest. Yeah, absolutely. And we're both enjoying it. I tell you, it's been just peaceful around here. William, we began to talk here about this Johnny. Pardon me, Johnny Oxendine. Like you.
Okay, somewhere you're cutting out on me, Don. I don't know what's causing that.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Well, anyway, what I was saying is I spent the first 20 minutes of Johnny Oxendine's presentation wondering when he was actually going to address the text of 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 and the issue of the man of sin and the great apostasy. All that I heard for the first 15 or 20 minutes was, all of the other speakers on this seminar are certainly right. This is heresy. That is, realized eschatology is heresy. It's false teaching. We've got to fight it. We've got to defeat it. We've got to get rid of it. Without addressing the text and even attempting to show why covenant eschatology is wrong. It was just simply an appeal to human emotion, really, that said, he kept saying, I just really don't understand why this subject even has to be studied. Why even address the issue? Well, then he went ahead and admitted that covenant eschatology is spreading in church after church after church. Therefore, it's necessary to address the issue. But I think one of the things that disturbed me, William, was that he seemed intent on judging the hearts and the motives of those of us who have accepted covenant eschatology.
Yeah, well, one of the first things that he said was that we must be doing it for money.
Yeah.
Every time I hear something like that,
I was just absolutely blown away. There has to be an ulterior motive here, he said, and there has to be something here about being motivated by money. And obviously, he does not know anything about those of us who have accepted covenant eschatology. I mean, where did he come up with this? I mean, it's just some of the most ridiculous and sad type of accusations. And yet, I'm sure it makes him feel better to say, oh, well, the only reason anybody would accept covenant eschatology is because of money. It makes me wonder, William, first of all, have you ever heard of this fella?
No, I've never heard of him. That's the first time I've ever heard him and heard of him.
Well, that's exactly the way with me. Now, I do want to be as honest as possible here. Since being basically cast out of the brotherhood and the lectureship circuit and what have you over the last several years, there are an awful lot of young men, and he is a younger man, but there are an awful lot of younger ministers in the churches of Christ that I've never heard of. So the fact that you and I have never heard of the young man really honestly means not just a whole lot. But the issue here is for this young man to just jump up and to judge the hearts and the motives of men that he does not know. And that's why I asked if you knew him. And, I haven't talked to anybody else, to be honest about it, that knows this young man. So it makes me wonder, does he actually personally know a full preterist? Does he know a full preterist that is motivated by money to become a full preterist? Because I can tell you right now, I know an awful lot of preterists. Every minister that I know that became a full preterist while still preaching in a traditional Church of Christ, they were fired from that job and experienced tremendous financial loss and made tremendous financial sacrifice because of their heartfelt convictions that the Lord came in AD 70. So again, it makes me wonder, okay, does Mr. Oxendine actually know a single preterist? And even if he does, does he know a single preterist that became so because he's motivated by money? And I can tell you, if they became a preterist thinking they were going to get rich, they're in for a really, really shocking disappointment. It's just unbelievable that men make them such.
Right. Yeah, I know a lot of preachers who refuse to become preterists because of the fact that they're not going to make any money doing it.
Exactly.
That's one of their greatest fears, I think, that holds many of them back, is because they realize that their paycheck's going to get cut drastically when they make that decision. If they're preaching for one of these local churches, that's just the way the cookie crumbles in most cases. Rare will you find a situation It's not impossible, but rare will you find a situation where the congregation is on board fully, and particularly the leadership, that they can just make a transition and continue rocking along the way they go. Now, just, I'm not saying that it can't be done. I know it has been done in some cases, but in most cases, it's not, because people will not study it, and they will, they find it easier to stand up and shout, false doctrine than to sit down and study and to reason with people to see whether or not things are so. And therefore, it becomes easy to categorically dismiss it. Just like Mr. Oxendine was saying, I don't even know why people would even study this. I don't even know why they would consider it, and which probably is the reason why there was very little substance in his presentation.
Well, it was more than obvious to me, as with some of the other speakers, Doug McClish possibly being an exception, but some of the other speakers that we have examined, it was more than obvious the men had not actually studied preterist literature. They haven't sat down and spent hour after hour after hour analyzing the arguments that we make, and again, reading the articles that we have written. Instead, they just make blanket statements about things that we supposedly believe, when in fact, when we listen to their speeches and about what we ostensibly believe, we sit back going, no, that's not what we believe. Where did you get the idea that we believe this? And yet, if you have the opportunity to confront men like this who make those false accusations and to say that is not what preterists believe, they'll jump up and say, yes, it is. Yes, it is. That's exactly what you believe. And you go, prove it. Quote some leading preterist. Quote some written source from preterists who espouse what you're saying. They won't even try. They will not even try. And I've had them even say, I don't have to quote you from a book. It's what you believe. And you're going, what? I mean, it's just, it is, again, it's so sad. It's so unfortunate. Number one, that men would get up with the aim and the goal of refuting a doctrine when they really honestly do not know what we teach. Johnny Oxendine never attempted even one time to quote Max King or any other preterist as to what we believe. Didn't even say, now on such and such page or in such and such book, the following preterist believes this or believes that. William Bell believes the following because in his book, The Reexamination, he said, not a word, not one single word. And then gets up and says, well, the motivation for these guys is pretty obviously money. Really? That proves nothing except that you haven't studied. You've refused to study. Now, it would be great if Mr. Oxendine would be listening to this program tonight and would have enough of a conscience to actually get some of our material and to spend the time reading it and studying it before ever making another presentation on covenant eschatology. Because the job he did at the Bellevue Church of Christ lectureship was as facile, which means shallow and inept, as any of the other speeches on the entire lectureship. And William, I think you'll agree with me. Every one of them that we have that we've listened to and critiqued so far has been really bad. Well, Mr. Oxendine's presentation, in some ways, stoops to a new level because, again, he spent 20 minutes of his presentation not even attempting to appeal to the text, what the text says, why it cannot mean what preterists are saying. Let me give a classic example of this, ladies and gentlemen. The one thing that I was pleased with is that Johnny Oxendine read 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, 1-2 from the New King James translation. And the reason I was pleased with that is because I was just afraid, pardon me, I was just afraid when I began listening that he was going to appeal strictly to the good old King James. Now, the good old King James says, don't let anyone convince you as by letter or epistle, as from us, that the day of the Lord is just at hand. Well, William, I know I well remember when I was sitting at my desk in Shawnee, Oklahoma, years and years ago, had my good old King James in front of me. I had been holding on in my own personal studies to 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 1 and 2, for a futurist view, because my thinking was like this. I don't know if you went through the same process that I did, but I suspect you did. But I sat there and I grabbed the Greek text. And I was reading the Greek text, and I realized that it did not support in any way, shape, form, or fashion the King James translation. The Greek is, don't let anyone convince you, and this is a paraphrase, convince you that the day of the Lord has already come or is already arrived. I was completely, totally stunned. I started grabbing translations off of the shelf. I continued to be stunned as I found and I discovered at the time, I do now, but at the time, I did not have one single additional translation other than the King James that agreed with the King James. Every single other translation in my library, and again, my library has expanded considerably since then in regard to translations that I have available to me. And now, of course, we got the wonderful internet. But here's the deal, folks. Go to BibleGateway.com. Just go there and look at all of the different translations. And you will find that there is a very, very, very small minority number of translations. Most of them are individual translations. They are not committee translations. Only that very, very small handful of translations agree with King James in saying, don't let anyone convince you that the day of the Lord is at hand. So here I was, William, sitting at my desk. I had been saying, okay, you got all these passages that say the day of the Lord is at hand. Then you got Paul saying to the church at Thessalonica, don't let anyone convince you that the day of the Lord is not at hand. I was perfectly happy with that. That meant that there was a day of the Lord that was at hand. It was a day of the Lord like the Old Testament days of the Lord, an event within history in which God used one nation to judge another nation. But then there was another, the real day of the Lord, the end of time day of the Lord, that was not at hand. And Paul in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, according to my thinking at the time, was juxtaposing, contrasting those two events, one at hand, one not at hand, until I made the humongous mistake of picking up the Greek text, picking up all of those different translations, and realizing that's a horrible translation. The proper translation is, without any question whatsoever, don't let anyone convince you that the day of the Lord has already come, has already arrived. I cannot begin to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, how stunned I really was. I sit there literally looking at the Greek text. I decided, okay, wait a minute. So after looking at all the different translations and realizing that the different translations agreed with the New King James, the American Standard, the New Revised, etc., I realized, okay, I got to look into the Greek. Well, it is the Greek word inestime, but it's in the perfect tense. Inestaken. It's only used about 7 times in the New Testament. Each and every single time that inestime is used in the perfect tense, it is rendered as past tense. Something that had happened and was now reality. I mean, it's just, there's really no question. I began to pick up the commentaries to try to find a solution to this. And what I found was the Greek commentators, those men who were highly, highly esteemed in the world of scholarship, who went deep into the Greek, were as deeply troubled by the proper translation as I was. And I found comments such as this. Well, there's no question that the true and proper meaning of inestime, however you wish to pronounce that. I'm not good on my Greek pronunciations. There's no question about the proper rendering of it. However, it is impossible to believe that the Thessalonians believed that the day of the Lord had already come. Therefore, we will not render it that way. Folks, that's presuppositional theology. That is allowing your theology to drive your definition of the Greek. That is a horrible, horrible hermeneutic. It is not the right way to interpret the Bible. So here, listening to the speaker today, when I listened to him, Mr. Oxendine, and he read from the New King James, I thought, aha, he's going to have to deal with the problem. But he didn't. He did not say, you know, brethren, this really is pretty difficult, because we don't have any idea how the Thessalonians could believe the day of the Lord had already come. And by the way, he runs over to 2 Timothy chapter 2:18, the famous passage of all of these men on the Bellevue lectureship about Hymenaeus and Philetus overthrowing the faith of some by saying the resurrection was already past. Not one man has even posed the question, how in the world could anyone convince anyone that Mr. Oxendine's view of the definition of the day of the Lord, Mr. Oxendine's view of the resurrection, how could anybody convince anybody that every human being who has ever lived and died, decomposed in the grave, has already been reconstituted, raised, resurrected, and is now alive? So when I heard Mr. Oxendine read from the New King James translation, I thought, aha, he's got to address the problem. William, did you hear him say anything about it?
Nope, I haven't heard him say anything. Like I said, I only heard about the first 20 minutes of it, but I didn't hear him, say a thing about what his premise was for who, the man of sin was. I just heard him talk about everything that it wasn't and that, we were all about.
Okay, well, he did go ahead to identify the man of sin as the Roman Catholic Pope.
Okay.
Down toward the close of his presentation. But, pardon me, the point I'm emphasizing right now, he never even addressed how anyone could possibly believe the day of the Lord had already come if the day of the Lord is an earth-burning, time-ending event. He acted like it's not even a problem. He doesn't even understand the issue. By the way, William, I'll never forget. When I saw the problem, when I was so stunned, I sat down and wrote a paper about 6 pages long at the time, entitled, How Is This Possible? Now, I had a friend at the time. He still would casually, carefully called me a friend, I suppose, but certainly not in public and certainly not from a pulpit. But be that as it may, he has his master's in the Greek. The last I knew, he was working on his doctorate in the Greek. Very brilliant guy, great logician, and he and I used to correspond an awful lot. Pardon me. And I knew that he took an awful lot of passages as applicable to the end of the age in AD 70. He agreed that the Lord came in AD 70 in some sense. He tried, like so many of us tried for years, to hold on to 1 Corinthians 15, 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. Well, I typed out this article posing the question. I did the linguistic study on the Greek word in its naked. I posed the question, how could anybody convince anybody that the day of the Lord had already come if the day of the Lord is an earth-burning, time-ending event, and if the resurrection is when every decomposed body of every dead person who's ever lived is raised out of the dirt, how could anybody convince anybody it already happened? So I sent the paper to him, and I said, I am sending this to you in friendship and in total confidentiality. I said in my letter, if anyone, it is my conviction that if anyone can show me the fallacy of my argument, the fallacy of my thoughts, it is you. I have the utmost respect for you, number one, as a logician, number two, as a Bible student, number three, as a Greek student. So if I'm wrong, please help me out. Weeks went by. Not a word. Finally, I get this letter. Very short, very terse. And he said, Don, I am not qualified to respond to this paper. Now, William, like I said, here's a man who already had his Greek, master's in Greek. He was a great logician, excellent speaker, excellent Bible student, and he says, I'm not qualified to deal with this. But, he said, with your permission, I will remove your name from the paper, and I will send it to Guy N. Woods. Well, William, you well know that Guy N. Woods was the name of several years ago.
That's correct. Okay, I've lost you again, Don. But yeah, Guy N. Woods certainly was, one of the preeminent defenders of the faith, a scholar by any man's right. I think he had a dual vocation as an attorney as well. So he was very, very skilled in using logic to advance concepts and ideas, and knew that very well. But anyway, I think you're back, so go ahead.
Okay. But my friend said I would like to send the article to Guy N. Woods. With your name removed, I'd like to get his response. 6 months passed, William. Finally, my friend forwards this letter to me from Guy N. Woods. Guy N. Woods wrote, "This is a whole lot of to-do about nothing." Signed it, Guy N. Woods. My friend made no comment whatsoever. Now, I suspect, pardon me, I suspect that was a very, very, very troublesome time for my friend, because I suspect that he realized, oh my goodness, if Guy N. Woods cannot answer this, I've already told Don that I don't know how to answer it. So if Guy N. Woods can't answer it, what am I supposed to say about it? So like I said, he simply returned the Guy N. Woods letter to me. He returned my article to me and did not offer one further word of comment. Now, by the way, since I have not mentioned any names whatsoever, I will say this. That man preaches for a congregation, will not even say which state it is in, but there is a youth minister who preaches at that congregation who is a full preterist and who corresponds with me on a fairly regular basis. So that's more than just a little bit interesting. I suspect that there's kind of a tacit agreement between my friend and the young man to say, well, just don't push it too hard and we won't worry about it. Well, all of that said, folks, it just simply brings us back to Mr. Oxendine. Here is an issue in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, a translational issue, that even though he read once from the King James and read once from the New King James, never, not one single time, did he address the pressing, the paramount problem that is in the text that scholars, some of the most brilliant scholars in the world, have struggled with. F. Bruce, for instance, in his comments on 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 2, said, it cannot be supposed that the Thessalonians believed that the events of 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 had taken place. So F. Bruce refused to translate it according to the actual lexical definition of inistaken. Refused. Just absolutely amazing.
That's such a pivotal word in the text, which most people who approach it never really consider. They never look at that term and see that, you know, what Paul was talking about was something that had already occurred, or at least they believed had already occurred, you know, had already set in, and that's the meaning of that term. You know, the old translations or the King James Version incorrectly translates it as not at hand, and many people get caught up with that, and that's where they get into this elastic exegesis on time statements, and they want to say that, you know, at hand doesn't mean at hand, and that's part of the reason why they do it. The other reason is, you know, they'll go to the Old Testament and think they found a text that, you know, expresses a few hundred years or something, and they'll say, well, you see, it's not at hand. But even then, they shoot themselves in the foot, because there is not a single one that they can go in the Old Testament and find that is, you know, 2,000 years and beyond for at hand. I mean, there are none they can get even close, but even with the ones that they think that they can use to cover 500 years, I mean, you know, that would still make them a preterist, you know, from that point of view.
Absolutely.
And yet they don't realize it, you know, when they do it. But, yeah, this term in 2 Thessalonians is key. It's very critical, and certainly requires anyone who's going to talk about the subject to look at the term so that you can interpret it. You know, he made some statement early on when he was talking about the subject, and just, you know, basically said, hey, you know, we're still here. I think he was talking about the end of the world at that particular point. But, you know, he just basically said, well, we're still here, you know. We're still breathing in and out.
Yeah, his question was, did the world end? Really? Did the world end? Are you there, William?
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah, so, okay. Yeah, he did. He asked that question, and he said, well, you know, we're still breathing in and we're breathing out, you know. And anyone who has at least looked at the New Testament, you know, has probably read a few of those passages where, you know, like Paul, who said the end of the ages have come upon us in 1 Corinthians 10. If you go to 1 Corinthians 7 and verse 26 and verse 31, he said the time is short, and the fashion of this world is, you know, passing away. And there are many other passages that talk about it. I mean, you would wonder if they're not talking about something that was occurring in their day, why they'd have so many passages that state that. Yet, they overlook it and just claim that, it's not there, and the easiest way to dismiss it is to shout, everybody else who believes something different is a false teacher.
Yeah. There was one thing that he hit on, William, and he didn't spend any time on it, which is probably to his benefit, especially considering the fact that he had already read a New King James translation. But he wanted to say, and he tried to say, that the day of the Lord was not imminent when Paul wrote. Well, it raises a question in my mind. If Paul taught, as these brethren want to claim, if Paul taught that the day of the Lord was going to be thousands of years away, then how could anybody jump up and say, hey, it's at hand, or it's already happened? If the church at Thessalonica knew that Paul had said the day of the Lord is a long way off, the day of the Lord will not be for thousands of years, the day of the Lord is not near, then don't you think that somebody at the church would jump up and say, when those who were saying the day of the Lord has already happened, don't you think somebody would jump up and say, oh, no, that can't be true, because Paul told us the day of the Lord wouldn't be for thousands of years. But the day of the Lord was sufficiently imminent. And by the way, William, even in the very first part of his presentation, Johnny Oxendine said there is a sense of urgency in the text of 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. And I thought, well, okay, that just destroyed your cause. If there's a sense of urgency in the text about the eschatological events, then where did that urgency come from? Did it come from the false teachers? Or did it come from Paul? Well, you've already called attention to some text there, William, in which Paul taught that the end was at hand. The fashion of this world is passing away. The end of the ages has come upon us. And other passages in Paul in which he expressed the imminence of the end. So if there was an urgency concerning the end to be found in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, was it from Paul or was it from the false teachers? If Paul taught urgency and imminence, and if the false teachers taught imminence, then they were not false teachers. Period. So that presents a problem for Mr. Oxendine. But, William, we're running out of time here. And to be honest about it, there really wasn't much of substance in Mr. Oxendine's presentation, except I want us to spend the rest of our time down toward the close of it. He said there was no great apostasy. Now, he spent his time pointing out that Paul said that before the day of the Lord could come, there had to be the falling away. And he said, he said there was no great apostasy from the time of Paul until AD 70. Therefore, Paul could not be talking about AD 70. Well, you know what? That would be a fairly valid argument if there was not an apostasy, if there was not a great apostasy from the time of Paul until AD 70. Because, indeed, Paul is saying that day, the day of the Lord, cannot come except the falling away come first. But, William, it absolutely stuns me how preachers in the churches of Christ who traditionally claim to have a handle on the Olivet Discourse can jump up and make a statement like this. And I'll never forget with my very first public debate with Bill Lockwood in Ardmore, Oklahoma. During a break, a guy came up to me and he said, Preston, I want to tell you something right now. I've got an argument you cannot answer. And I said, well, okay, what is that argument? And he used Mr. Oxendine's very argument. Paul said that before the day of the Lord comes, there has to be the great apostasy. And he said, you can't show me a great apostasy from Paul until AD 70. I said, really? I said, well, let me ask you a question. I said, do you believe that Matthew 24, verses 4 to 34, 35, or verse 36 was fulfilled in the events leading up to and climaxing in AD 70? He says, yeah, but what's that got to do with my argument? I said, well, let's see what it has to do. Matthew chapter 24, verse 9 says, they shall deliver you up to be afflicted, they shall kill you, and you shall be hated of all nations for my name's sake. And then many shall be offended and shall betray one another and shall hate one another. Sounds to me like an apostasy is about to take place. And many false prophets shall arise and shall deceive many. So now we've got the betrayal of many, many being offended, many falling away, and now we've got many being deceived by the false prophets. Oh, but watch this, verse 12. And because iniquity shall abound, and by the way, that word iniquity is translated as lawlessness in most translations, and it's the same word that Paul uses in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 to speak of the man of lawlessness, the spirit of lawlessness that was already at work. But Jesus said, now watch this, folks, because iniquity shall abound, the love of many shall wax cold. Now here's an apostasy, but folks, here's something, and you must catch the power of this. In the previous verses, all right, when Jesus talked about many being deceived, he simply uses the word poloi, Greek word poloi. Then in verse 12, he says, because iniquity shall abound, the love of many. But he doesn't just say the love of poloi. No, it is the love of hoi poloi. Literally, the many. And the New American Standard Translation, along with many Greek scholars, says what this means is the love of the majority will grow cold. Look what Jesus said in Luke chapter 18. I went ahead to point this out to this gentleman in the hallway there at the debate in Ardmore. I said, in Luke chapter 18, Jesus talked about persecution that would be so great prior to his coming that he posed the question, when the Son of Man comes, will he even find faith on the earth? But I said, pardon me, he's talking about it in a context of the avenging of the martyrs, which Jesus said would take place in his coming in the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70. I said, now, to this gentleman, I said, Jesus said the majority of Christians would fall away. And he asked the question, the rhetorical question, will he even find faith on the earth when he comes? So I said, do you want to hold on to that argument that there was not an apostasy from the time of Jesus or from the time of Paul until AD 70? And he stood there with that proverbial deer in the headlight look and finally said, well, I wasn't aware of those verses. So he said, I'm going to have to give that some thought. I said, fair enough. So he went on his way. I wonder if Johnny Oxendine has ever in his life looked at the Greek of Matthew 24, 10 to 12. Makes me think, based on his comments, that he never has. Has he never even looked at the English of Luke chapter 18 and compared Luke 18 with Matthew chapter 23. It makes me think he never has. You know, William, about all that I can say to such arguments like this, and by the way, has Mr. Oxendine never even read the book of Galatians? Here is Paul writing it to an entire region, to all of the churches in that region, and he says, I marvel that you are so soon removed from him who called you into the grace unto another gospel, which is not another, but there are some who would trouble you and who would pervert the gospel of Christ. Here's Paul talking about an entire region of churches that he says were apostatizing. They were abandoning the faith. And yet Mr. Oxendine says, no, there was no apostasy from the time of Paul until AD 70. That's what I mean when I say that Mr. Oxendine's presentation was facile. It was incredibly shallow, demonstrating an absolute lack of research, an absolute lack of study. And I'm not trying to be unkind to Mr. Oxendine, but when you stand in front of an audience and you impugn the heart, when you impugn the motives, when you impugn the integrity and the motives of literally thousands upon thousands of Bible students, and you say their motivation is money when nothing could be farther from the truth, and yet you get up and say things like that, and you present a lesson that is so incredibly shallow in its content, then you really, really need to be called out on it. Now, kindly to be sure, and I mean no disrespect to him personally, but what he wrote was as shallow a presentation as was given. Now, we haven't listened to the rest of them, so there may be some others that will rival his in their shallow nature and for being poor. But this is a truly bad presentation. And he also said, William, you know, this kind of stuff just really, really bothers me. He said there was no man of sin from Paul's time until AD 70. Well, if there was no man of sin, William, didn't Paul say something about the man of sin already being alive when he wrote?
Yes, he did.
Why don't you share a few thoughts with us on that, William?
Well, you know, the text very clearly says that, you know, the man of sin sits in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. You know, I often have conversations with, you know, people who have dispensational tendencies and bents about that text, and they want to talk about a new temple that was being built when they overlook the one that's in the text and that was present at the time. But Paul told them, you know, while he was with them, he said, the mystery of iniquity is already at work. So that situation of which he describes in 2 Thessalonians 2 is one that was present. And he tells them, he says, you know, because he told them while he was with them. If this were something that were not going to happen for another 2,000 years, why was Paul there warning them about something that was going to occur within the temple that had to be restrained, that was being restrained at that very time? And he said he would be revealed in his own time. So you had a restrainer present, you had the temple present, you had the man of sin sitting in the temple showing himself that he was God, you had the people present that he had talked to, you had the Apostle Paul present who was informing them about it. I mean, everything in the text points to something that was present with the exception of the actual revealing of the man of sin. And that was going to be done at the return of Christ. But why go through all that effort and trouble to tell them, to point to that temple, that it was already taking place, and then have people come and say, well, no, and then at least you have to give the dispensationalists credit. They at least will say, well, he's going to build another one so it can happen. The only problem with that is they miss the imminent and present ongoing activities that were being expressed in the first century.
You know, William, there's a principle at work here that I think we need to take a look at. And that is the fact, when Daniel was given his visions of the time of the end, it was a vision of the Great Tribulation, Daniel 12:1. It was a vision of the resurrection, Daniel 12:2. It was a vision of the time of the end when the righteous would shine forth in the kingdom, Daniel 12:3. Again, the time of the end, not the end of time, but the time of the end. And in Daniel 12:4 and in Daniel 12:9 and 10, Daniel was told, Daniel, seal up this vision, for it is many days to come. It is for the time of the end. Daniel, go your way, for you shall rest with your fathers until the time of the end. Okay, so here is Daniel. From the time Daniel wrote, I take the early date of the book of Daniel. Here is Daniel, writing in the 6th century BC, predicting events, the Great Tribulation, abomination of desolation, which Jesus placed in his first century generation. So approximately 600 years. Let's just round it off to 600 years. Daniel was being given a vision of 600 years away, and Daniel was told, look, Daniel, seal up the vision because it's not for your day. It's not for your time. You're going to die. You're going to rest with the fathers until the time of the end. Then you will be raised to receive your inheritance. And yet, we are supposed to believe that Paul, writing to the Thessalonians, was writing to them about the rise of the Roman Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Pope, that didn't happen for 600 years. And yet, the speaker and the speakers at Bellevue Church of Christ Lectures tell us there was a sense of urgency in Paul's words. There was a sense of urgency in that context. Why in the name of reason how could there be a sense of urgency if Paul's talking about things 600 years off, or in the final fulfillment of it, 2,000 years and counting away? Mr. Oxendine's got a tremendous problem here. Now, supposedly, here we have Daniel predicting the resurrection, which is the time of the day of the Lord in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. Daniel envisioned that, and it was 600 years from Daniel to Paul, and Daniel was told, seal it up. It's a long, long time off. You're going to die. It's not for your day. And in stark, absolute contrast, Paul writes to the Thessalonians about the same events, which will be 3 times longer in the not-too-distant future, from Paul until, 2100. Okay, well, that's a little ways off. But anyway, folks, you see the idea? 600 years from Daniel to Paul, seal the book, it's a long time off. Paul's talking about the same identical events, and it's been 2,000 years, and Paul was not told to seal the book. It was something that he had warned them about. It was something they were supposed to be prepared for. There is simply no rhyme, no reason, no logic in Johnny Oxendine's position that the man of sin was the Roman Catholic Church, or that Paul was talking about the Roman Catholic Pope that will be destroyed at some literalistic end-of-time, earth-burning, cosmos-destroying event. William, I believe that's sufficient for Mr. Oxendine. I don't. He literally did not say anything else that deserves our attention. What we've said thoroughly debunks everything that he said. So I think we'll leave it at that. I want to thank everyone for joining us for Two Guys in the Bible here on Fulfilled Radio, a voice you can trust. And folks, keep sharing the word. We have people keep signing up to be subscribers. We appreciate that so much. So thanks again for joining us. Good night. God bless.
Thank you for joining the Two Guys in the Bible radio broadcast. On behalf of Dunn Preston and myself, we'd like to say have a very pleasant day, and may God bless. Until next time, we'll see you on Fulfill Radio, a voice you can trust.